essentially my number one goal for this session is to make you not afraid of poetry. So I don't know what your feelings are. Since you're the only one in here, I'm going to ask you how you feel about poetry, and like, do you ever read poetry? I know I always have a few students who write poetry, but honestly, most people just say, well, I hate poetry and I don't understand it. And my teachers do things like, oh, well, this symbolizes that, and this symbolizes this, and blah, blah, blah. And they think, well, that's just dumb. And I can't ever get what it symbolizes, so I just read it and I don't understand it. But the truth is, and if you would, you don't have to unmute yourself, but if you can, but you can also just type in, what is it that how do you personally feel about poetry? And it's okay if you don't like poetry. I'll just try to get you somewhere else by the end of this unit. So
Can
what
you
do you
hear
think
me?
of it? Yeah, I can hear you.
I think it's like much easier to talk than type all that out sometimes.
Oh, I completely agree. I have a few students in my other 1102 class, and they just leave their mic on. One of them has a baby too, so it's cute. I get to hear a baby
Oh,
sometimes. But um, so what do you
I
think of poetry?
I would probably say that I'm like in the middle with poetry. Like I do find it enjoyable sometimes, but like the more complicated the reading gets, the more I find myself not understanding it very well. So then I kind of get
Okay.
frustrated with it. So I'm
Mhm.
very in the middle about it.
Okay. And what about like music?
I actually have not. I actually did not know that that was actually really a thing.
Well, I mean, the truth is, okay, so let's think of, I mean, what if you listen to music on the radio, or I don't know if you have, like, both my kids have Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
I just have iTunes, but I listen to a lot of stuff on YouTube, and I love music videos too, but that's because I love film in general. But what genre of music do you tend to listen to, or are there several
I
genres?
I am in like an all over genre. I pretty much listen to everything.
Okay, because
I do not have like one certain preference.
that's cool. Because not many people are like that. Most people are like my husband. I mean, I guess he really likes a lot of country, but he likes regular pop, and he loves 80s rock because that's the era we grew up in. But my son likes 80s hard rock and metal. So like Ozzy Osbourne and stuff like that. And we actually bought him a, what is it? A it's a record player, but they call it something else now. I don't even know what they call it. Um, but he has actual old school records to play of Ozzy Osbourne and all sorts of other, golly. Um, I'm trying to think of all the bands he really likes. I don't like all of them. Megadeth is one of them. I know that's one of the ones he really likes. I like some Megadeth. I'm actually really into hard rock, but I like old hard rock and recent hard rock and metal. So I listen, and I love classical music. So I listen to classical music or hard rock, which makes no sense, but I mean, I listen to pop. I know a lot of pop songs, and I listen to a lot of country. I can't say I listen to a lot of jazz. Is the only thing I really just don't get. So,
I
but
do
that's just
have
me.
like I've told many people my Spotify list is very all over the place because we
Mhm.
might go to country one song and then the next song might be like a throwback 90s country, then you got a
Uh-huh.
throwback 90s song. So it's very random. I love it all, really.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is too, I mean, I don't know how you are. I'm pretty much like, I like the music part of it the best, and the rhythms and the instrumental stuff and everything. My husband, it's all about the story.
Mhm.
So, that's why I think why he likes country music best, and well, really country music's probably his go-to. And also things like he really likes like praise and worship music and stuff. But he cares about the words. And it's funny because I'm the English teacher, and yet he's the one who cares about the words.
Mhm.
So that makes no sense. And yet the words are poetry. And so the truth is, and this is what I guess I want you to have it in your head, the poetry, and looking at poetry, they're going to look at analyzing poetry in this chapter. We're going to look at, how do you enjoy poetry? and how do you read poetry, and how do you kind of go in and see what poetry's doing. That's really the number one question I'm going to be asking, is what is this poem doing? Because it's not just, oh, what does it all mean and what does it signify, but what is it trying to say to us, and how is it trying to make us feel? Because that's songs make us feel something. In fact, if it doesn't do something for us, we're not going to listen to it. If it doesn't give us an upbeat something that makes us want to go exercise or dance or something, or it doesn't make us feel, I love sad songs. I love sad songs. I love sad music, movies too, but I just love songs where it's like it's hopeless and I've lost you and you're never coming back. I think those are just gut-wrenching, beautiful songs. Some of my favorite songs are kind of rough, but they're songs that um, really talk about something real. And so, what I'm going to do actually this unit, and I'm probably going to just leave it up in the discussions, is allow you to tell me what are your favorite songs. And so because I want to, and I'll tell you guys, okay, well, that song reminds me of, and I'll give you songs, but I want you to all be sharing that, because the truth is we listen to poetry all the time. We are surrounded by poetry and we love it. Little bitty kids love poetry. I mean, think about Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss was entirely poetry. Everything he wrote was poetic, rhyming with very particular rhythms, and it's brilliant. And as a kid, I loved it. As kids, my kids loved it. They still love it. And I still love reading those books to kids. So I mean, the truth is we've been taught through English classes, well-meaning, well-intentioned English classes, we've been taught to hate poetry, and that's not fun. That's not fair either. So my job this semester is to, at least for the next 6-7 weeks or so, is to get you guys to where you understand, hey, wait a second, I actually like poetry. And so I'm going to go ahead and it will be after this session that we record today, but I'm going to put up just a discussion board and just say, tell me your favorite song type thing. And what is it about the song that you really like? And I'm going to go and listen to it. And I'm going to tell you what I think, and then give you other songs that you might like that are in other genres or something like that. But I'm hoping, honestly, to add to my iTunes list and buy myself a bunch of songs by the time this is over. I love hearing new songs. My husband's really into the old stuff, and he'll listen to it over and over and over again. I like old, but I like new. So I tend to always want to find a new song. If I hear a band I really like, I like one song, I want to go in and I want to listen to their entire playlist and figure out if there are other songs I want. So I'm hoping that if nothing else, you guys get that connection to each other. So the very first thing I'm going to want you to understand, and this is one reason I use music, is I want you to understand that the number one most important thing about poetry is how it sounds. So it's not what does it mean and how can we go through and figure out the allegory or figure out what all these symbols mean or something like that. It's not its crypticness. That's like the bottom of the list. The most important element of poetry is sound. How does it sound when it's read aloud? So I'm going to tell you one piece of advice, and hopefully everybody watches this so they know. But the number one piece of advice is read the poems out loud. The word poem actually means song in Greek. So all the poems that we have, like we do have a Greek poet named Sappho, and she was female, but she wrote a lot of wedding songs, but they're all poetry. We don't have the music to go with it. All we have is her words, but those were intentionally made. They were love songs and songs actually made in honor of people when they got married and stuff like that. But they're songs. And so you don't have to sing them. You don't have to sing these poems, but you should speak them out loud. Even things like epic poems, the big long stuff like Beowulf and the Iliad and the Odyssey and stuff like that. Those are, old epics, but those were all meant to be said out loud. In fact, most people at that time couldn't read. And so the poet would memorize the entire poem and then would recite it over sometimes several nights. you know, maybe a chapter a night or something like that. But they weren't read, they were only spoken and listened to. And so I really want you, you know, if you're going through each time we do a journal, go through and read the poem. And, you know, in your response, you know, feel free to talk about how something sounds. There are poems I've heard people read, and there are parts of them that are jarring because they don't fit rhythmically with a poem or something like that. But most of the poems we're going to read are either going to be free verse, where they don't really have a definite rhythm that's consistent, or they're going to be rhymed and rhythmic poems. Most of the ones we're probably going to read are going to be rhymed and rhythmic, so that, you know, because that's just the tradition of poetry. And really, we don't even have free verse until we get to about 1860s, with Walt Whitman, who wrote Leaves of Grass in free verse in the United States. So most of the poems we're going to read are going to be rhymed and rhythmic, but hopefully still, if you read them out loud, hopefully the sound of them and the rhythm of them is the first thing that you get to deal with. And that's what I really want you to, don't worry so much about what a poem means. Like, the whole point of it, it's not a puzzle. It's just an expression in it, you know, essentially what, and I can't remember who wrote it, but the definition I always use of poetry is it's I'm just going to put this in here, poetry. And it's that they are the best words in their best order. So it's usually they're very tightly written. There's not a lot of fluffy stuff. We don't put in a bunch of ums and uhs and you knows or anything like that, the way that we would in just our conversation. It's all very, very closely designed. And that's really what separates a poem from prose and everything else. Also, we have these ideas of line endings, you know, that we don't necessarily run it all the way to the end of the page and then go back automatically. Instead, we choose where the poem ends each line. And so that's a different element of poetry. Now, we also often have rhyming elements. We're going to actually talk about, once we get into a little bit more, we're going to talk about rhythm, and we're going to talk about how to scan a poem, but it's all going to be out loud. And that's the most important thing. Again, read the poem out loud, and you're going to be able to scan it much more easily. And I'll try to give you examples. The examples I have in your journals, especially when we get to sonnets, are very much about reading it out loud and hearing the stresses and lack of stresses. So we're going to play with this, but I really want you to keep that in mind, that it's going to be playing. So I want you to have fun with this and be goofy with it. And that's one reason I assigned the 2 poems that I did for today. But we'll probably not get to those. What I'll probably end up doing is we'll get to them in some of the other live chats with 1102, my other class. And so what I'll do is I'll post them, everything we discuss, I'm going to post in both rooms. So anything we don't talk about in this class on Thursday mornings, we will definitely have covered in the other sessions with my 1102 online. And so between the 2 of you guys, your class, and then the other class, we'll get everything discussed, so that we'll have gone through all of the poems by the time we get through with this section. So the main thing is I don't want you to take it too seriously. And it's okay, absolutely, completely fine if you do not like a poem. That is absolutely fine. So it's funny that they gave you Ode on a Grecian Urn, because I can't say that it's, what's the word? I can't say that it's the most accessible poem ever. And the truth is, okay, let's talk about John Keats for a second. But so that you guys so that you don't know, in case you don't know, Keats is one of my favorite poets ever, but not so much because I just absolutely love his poetry, though there are some really cool poems by him. My favorite poem by John Keats is actually his longest poem that I know of, and it's called The Eve of Saint Agnes. But it's pretty long, so I don't think I didn't assign it. But in The Eve of Saint Agnes, it's kind of like Romeo and Juliet. Did you guys read Romeo and Juliet in English class, like in freshman or sophomore year?
I want to say that we did,
Okay.
but I can't quite remember either. But
Do
I
you
believe
know
it.
do you know what it's about typically? I mean, who are Romeo and Juliet?
Oh, now you done put me on the spot.
It's okay.
It's
Okay, so
been so
Romeo,
long. It's been so long since I've read that, and I don't really know why I don't know the answer to that
it's okay.
question.
What I would suggest though is watch Romeo plus Juliet.
Okay.
It's more recent. It was actually it had Leonardo DiCaprio in it as Romeo and Claire Danes is Juliet. And she was brilliant. He was really good, but she was brilliant in it. It's probably the most recent Romeo and Juliet to come out, but they modernized it a bunch, but
Mhm.
it's still really cool. Um, and then, but Romeo and Juliet, Romeo essentially is of the House of Montague, and Juliet is of the House of Capulet. And those houses, those two families hate each other. And so somehow, I mean, Romeo is actually in love with somebody else, but he falls in love with Juliet at a Capulet party. He snuck in masked with some friends, and he falls in love, insta love with Juliet. Well, they end up, secretly getting married, and but it's a tragedy by Shakespeare, so it doesn't end well. It actually ends with both of them committing suicide. It's a that may be what when if you don't read it, that's probably why you didn't. I read it in ninth grade. In 10th grade, I read Julius Caesar. In 11th grade, even though it was American lit, I read, I think it was Hamlet. And then in 12th grade, it was Macbeth. But I had already read a bunch. I went to Shakespearean Festival, so I'm a complete nerd. But I became a huge Shakespeare fan. But Romeo and Juliet is like this, like when you hear the term star-crossed lovers, that's Romeo and Juliet. That they are fated to not be together because their families hated each other so badly. And the only thing that stops the feud at the end of the play is that they're both dead. And the families realize what they've done to their own children, and they decide to stop the feud and make amends. But in the Eve of St. Agnes, which is actually based on like a holiday, the Eve of St. Agnes is, I think, either the 19th or I think St. Agnes, that holiday is the 20th of January. So on the 19th of January, if a woman, an unmarried woman, doesn't like she focuses just on her question, hardly eats dinner, and then sleeps in the moonlight. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to sleep with moonlight shining through the window on you. You will dream of your future husband. That's the myth of the Eve of St. Agnes. And so in the poem, this woman does all that, this young girl, and she sleeps under the moonlight, and the man that she's actually in love with is from another family that they've been feuding with. He's but he sneaks into her room in the middle of the night, and so when she wakes from her dream of him, he's there, and they run away together and they live happily ever after. So it's a romantic kind of Romeo and Juliet thing, only it doesn't end in tragedy. It's actually very romantic, but it's a very long poem as well. But Keats he did actually have sort of an engagement, but it was not realized. If there's actually a cool movie about him, it's more about her than him, called Bright Star. And she actually was kind of a fashionista at the time. She made her own clothes and stuff, and she wears cool outfits in the movie. But she fell in love with Keats, but he tended his mom, who died of tuberculosis, and then his brother, who died of tuberculosis, and then at the age of, I think he was 27, he died of tuberculosis, unfortunately. And so even though he actually wrote prolifically, he died at a very young age. So and that's probably one reason I like him as well. But what he's talking about in here, and when it says Ode on a Grecian Urn, it's exactly that. He is writing a poem, and it's about an urn he saw that had Greek illustrations on it. So the Greeks in general, let me see if I can, just gonna I'm just going to show you like this kind of thing where the Greeks tend to, even though most of these were, I mean, these are pretty real. Okay, so this is kind of where we want to go anyway. So on the Grecian urn, it was very typical, and there were different kinds of Greek art. The middle one, this one with the black figures, and then and essentially what they would do with these urns is they would create the urn, and it's made of this red clay that's this background. Then they would cover it with black, like black lacquer, and then they would carve out everything but the figures. So you'd see all of these are like they cut lines in the neck of the urn, and then they'd create all these figures on the outside. It could be people at war, it could be, you know, lovers reclining on a couch, whatever it is. But it, you know, so this was usually going to be holding either water or oil, like olive oil or something like that for cooking. But it had a you know, some utility to it. It was a useful object, but it was also very beautiful, and that's kind of the way Greeks did things. So what he did, and this is where we get, I've just got to find the right thing again. Essentially, he saw the Grecian urn, and then he's just writing a poem about what it conjures, the ideas it conjures in his head, and so that's all it means. He looked at the urn and then said, "Oh wow, that's really, you know, those are some cool images. Maybe I should put them in a poem." And then he wrote the poem. Of course, now we have to read it a little bit out loud, and that's what I'm going to do now. But one thing that they do suggest, and they have those after here, it says here are some points for getting started. Read full sentences without stopping at the end of the line. Look up words, and you've probably heard people who read a poem really sing-songy, and I can show you the different things. But essentially what that's the first thing that I want you to do is try to read it as naturally as possible. Good poems will naturally lend themselves to that. So let me just read it a little bit and I'll read the first stanza and I'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Now, I will be reading more slowly. Poetry should be read more slowly than prose. I could read prose very quickly, but poetry lends itself more. Kind of the, I mean, same with a song. If you look at the actual words in a song and you read them all out, all the lyrics, it would go very quickly. And yet most songs are 3.5 to, you know, some as long as 6 or 7 minutes. And so they read more slowly. They sing more slowly. Opera is even worse. I mean, it could take them 2 minutes to say their name in opera. So, but here, I'll just read this first stanza. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. What leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape of deities or mortals or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loath? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What ecstasy? Now he's just looking at it's like he's talking to the urn. And he's just saying, you know, what is it that you're trying to tell us? You know, you can say, you can express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme. In other words, what you express on the urn is better than anything I can put into poetry. You know, what have you heard the expression, a picture says 1,000 words, you know, or tells 1,000 words? And that's you know, one picture can be that evocative, and that's what he's saying. So he's going to blab about it, he thinks, but it's not nearly as good as the urn itself. But then he says, well, what's on, you know, what are the figures on the urn itself? So who are these people that are on this urn? And you know, the truth is it doesn't there's no key. It even says there's no legend, you know, it says what leaf fringe legend haunts about thy shape. So what's the story? Well, we don't know, because it doesn't have, you know, this is Odysseus and this is Achilles and these are the gods, or it doesn't say. And it says heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. So in other words, probably there's a figure of someone playing a pipe on the urn. And he just thinks it's a beautiful illustration, but you can't actually hear what the person's playing. And it says, pipe to the spirit ditties of no tone. And then he starts talking about something that's really different, and it's not what we would probably have expected, or maybe it wouldn't have occurred to us viewing this urn. And this is what ends up becoming what he really focuses on. He says, fair youth beneath the trees, thou canst not leave thy song. So the person who's playing the music will always be playing the music. They can't move. Nor can those trees be bare. So the trees are all leafy. There's a youth underneath them playing music, but he can't ever stop playing music, and the leaves will never lose their leaves, like with fall or something like that. And it says, bold lover, this is a different scene, never, never canst thou kiss, though winning near the goal. So so it looks like a man is about to kiss his love, but they haven't kissed yet. And so there's the expectation, but he will never actually kiss her because it's fixed on the urn. And it says, yet do not grieve. She cannot fade, though thou hast not thy bliss. Forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. So he's like, you're never actually going to reach the fruition of kissing her. You're never going to get to do that, but she will never grow old, and you will always be in love. So everything is fixed in that moment. Does that make sense? Because it can't move. You can't change what's on the urn. And so hopefully that makes sense. And he's just eventually what he says is, well, that's what this is. This is an expression of that fixed point in time. And because it's that fixed point in time, it essentially immortalizes everything that's on it. And so he says, and he says, because of that, the melodist is unwearied and will always be piping. The happy love will stay happy and stay love. It won't ever falter. It won't ever change. Everything is still going to be beautiful. The trees will still have, it kind of just repeats those ideas. Everything is going to be the same. And then he finds another image. Essentially, they're going to sacrifice a bull, well, a cow, the heifer, lowing at the skies. And so there, but it never happens. It's everything's going to stay exactly the same. And so this is an immortalization of life at the time of the ancient Greeks. And it's never going to be diminished. So it's going to essentially, it's capturing the perfection of life without its degradation. The trees will stay beautiful and fluffy. The music will stay perfect, and the man will stay happy playing the music. The two lovers will never really consummate anything, but they will stay in love forever. And that immortalization is the whole point of it. And so in a way, though, he says, in some ways there's still a problem in that, yes, it can't go forward, but it's also, it's not life, because in life, what happens? When old age shall this generation waste. So we're all going to get old. And what's weird is at that time, of course, at 1819, when he published this poem, the urn was probably 3,000 years old. And now it's another couple of hundred years old, and it's still, survived. And so he says, when old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man, to whom thou sayest. So they're saying, someday we're all going to be dead, but the next generation, or the generation after that, or the generation after that, it's still going to speak to, because it's immortal. And so, for poets, that's a big thing, and in fact, Shakespeare wrote several sonnets that say, I wrote your name upon the sand and it all got washed away. But then I wrote it in a poem and now you're immortal. And so they see that expression of poetry as what will be left behind once they die, which in a way is true. You know, Keats died a long time ago, and yet we still read his poems. And so there is something to that. We know, I mean, there's some of my favorite songs were sung by people, and thank goodness we have recordings of them, but they were sung by people who are now passed away or who can't sing anymore. My husband's a huge AC/DC fan, and the main singer he can't be in concert. So I'm not a huge fan of his singing, but my husband is. But the truth is that, you know, I think about so many artists who've gone before who the only thing we have left is their songs because they've passed away. And that's both men and women in so many different genres. And so the poems themselves too, the writing of those poems, that will survive even after those people pass away. Okay, so he's going through, they kind of go through, and what I don't want you to do is don't look up all the words. Not the first time. Okay? Because that's like just it's an exercise in torture, and that is not what poems are supposed to be. So essentially what they do is, you know, they're showing how this person took notes and things like that. Now we're going to talk about rhythms, but not this time. We're going to actually speak about rhythms more when we get to or closer to sonnets. But we will talk about those, and hopefully I'll get you guys actually playing around with that kind of scansion. Okay, what I'm going to do is move this over, and we're going to play so we have a little bit of time, and we're going to play. Have you ever read before this? Had you read the Jabberwocky?
I have not.
Okay, so this was new. It's funny because it's actually not in Alice in Wonderland. It's in the sequel, Through the Looking Glass. And everybody, we're doing a Wired Up thing on campus this semester, and it's going to be on Halloween. We always do it on Halloween, but the theme of it is Alice in Wonderland. And so we were talking about the books, and I said, well, you know, it's more like this book. And they said, what do you mean this book? And I said, well, there's more than one. Really? Yeah. I said the second book is Through the Looking Glass, where she climbs actually through a mirror and goes into Wonderland. Alice does. So, but in this is actually in the second book, and Jabberwocky it's a nonsense poem. It's supposed to be anyway, but it actually does have a story in it, but it plays with a lot of words. And so what happens, and this is Lewis Carroll was actually an English teacher. Believe it or not, he was a medievalist, and so was J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And many of who's the other, C.S. Lewis, who wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and all the Narnia Chronicles. He was a medievalist. So which is funny because my specialization is in medieval and Renaissance British literature. So and I write too, but it's in this case he's playing around with it. And in fact, in the book itself, they have the poem, and then of all people, I don't know if you've seen Puss in Boots, the one with the egg in it, Humpty Dumpty. You remember?
Yes.
Okay, so Humpty Dumpty is kind of, you know, he has evil tendencies in Puss in Boots. Well, in this one, he blathers a lot, but he thinks he's super smart. And so Lewis Carroll actually has the poem, and then Humpty Dumpty explicates the poem. And I'm going to put that word in here so you can see. The word explicate means to essentially parse it out. You're analyzing it and telling me what it means. Okay. In fact, a lot of 1102 teachers will, you know, for their second paper will say, okay, explicate a poem. And you're supposed to go through and talk about the rhyme and rhythm and all this other stuff. and then tell me what it means. Go through the lines and what each line means and kind of translate it for me. Well, Humpty Dumpty does this with this. And so he even goes through and says, these are nonsense words. They actually don't exist. So 'twas brillig. Brillig's not a word. Slithy toves are not words. That's just, he's making them up completely. They're total nonsense words that have no meaning. Gyre is not a verb. Gimble is not a verb. Wabe is not a real word. None of these are real words. Mimsy, not a real word. Borogoves that don't exist. Momraths, outgrade, that's all nonsense, okay? And it's on purpose. So what happens is Humpty Dumpty looks at this and goes, okay, well, 'twas brillig. So this is the time for broiling, which is the time for tea, and that's always 4 in the afternoon. And he essentially assigns a meaning to each one of these words to tell us who these things are and what exact time it is and exactly what's happening. But he makes it up. He doesn't know because none of these actually mean anything. And that's the whole point of what Lewis Carroll is saying, is it's nonsense. And yet there's some snooty scholar person who's going to go in and go, oh, this obviously means this and this and this, and be all snobby about it. And in reality, that just makes people miserable and it takes away the enjoyment of the poem, which is totally the point I will make for the next 6 weeks, at least, is that it's the number one important thing to do with a poem is enjoy it. And so the most important thing you can do with Jabberwocky and any other poem we do is just enjoy it. Listen to it for what it is, take the sounds in, and then see what comes out of it. And the truth is there something that can come out of this poem? Yes. So we have all this stuff at the beginning, right? This is all nonsense with extra nonsense, right? But do we get a tone from this? Is there a feeling you still get when I say 'twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe? All mimsy were the borogoves and the momraths outgrabe. It sounds like something, right? Even if it's not any real words. What kind of place are we in? Is this a really happy place with lots of springtime, or is it more of a creepy place with weird, creepy stuff going on?
More of a creepy place.
Yes.
Creepy stuff going on.
So we even like the slithy, even these 2 words, slithy toes, it's almost like slimy, does that, or writhing, we get a lot of words that it sounds like creepy stuff. And they sound nasty, like they could be little worms or something. But the truth is we don't know, it's just how it sounds. And then they gyre and gimble in the wabe. Now, of course, wabe sounds kind of like wave. But what is, I mean, it sounds like it could be a bog or something, like and they're gyring, how do you gyre? Well, it could be something, it just sounds creepy. And do we know what it means? No, it just sounds creepy. And even the momraths, I mean, they sound creepy. And what does outgrabe mean? I have no idea, but it sounds creepy. The momraths outgrabe sounds like it's got something sinister to it. It doesn't sound happy. And so essentially what he's doing is he's giving us nonsense words that can still have associations that make us feel like, ooh, this is an eerie something. And then we have this creature, the Jabberwocky. And now he takes off the Y part, probably for the rhythm, instead of the beware of the Jabberwocky, my son, he says, beware of the Jabberwock, my son. The jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Now, those sound creepy and formidable. Like those are, when you talk about beware of the jaws that bite, that makes me think of, first of all, the movie Jaws, which was well after this poem was written. But that's not a happy image. The claws that catch is also not. And you think about like a grasping bird, with the big talons that grab you. And then it says, beware of the jub bird, whatever that is. I always think of big bird when I think of jub bird. And shun the frumiest bandersnatch. And that sounds creepy too. It sounds scary, a bandersnatch. Just the word snatch in there kind of sounds creepy. And frumious, It sounds like furious with, I don't know, something else in it. It sounds scary. And the fact that he's saying the word beware automatically suggests this is something that has to be careful. We have to be careful. Now, who's speaking? And how do we know? There are two words that are key. And do have quote marks. So we know this is spoken by someone.
Maybe the son's father?
Yes. So dad, whoever dad happens to be, says, son, beware of the Jabberwock and the Jubjub bird and the Frumious Bandersnatch. So don't go out there and beware of all this stuff. But then we assume the son doesn't pay attention. So he took his Vorpal sword in hand. Again, Vorpal is that a nonsense word? Yes. Long time the manxome foe he sought. Now, manxome, the closest I can get to an actual meaning of that is that, have you ever heard of a manx?
I don't think I have.
Okay, it's a species of cat. And
Maybe
it's tailless. So it either has like a little bump for a tail, or it's.
Yes, I have heard of that before.
I owned a manx once, so I had a what they call a rumpy. He doesn't have a little bump on the end of his tail, where his tail should be. They're usually, some people, like, they're from the Isle of Man. That's why they're called manxes, but that's just an island off the coast of Britain. And many people, well, at least the legend is that they're half rabbit, half cat, because they have very strong hind legs and they can actually jump. My cat could jump 12 feet easy up in the air. But they're my cat was also massive. He was like 24 pounds. He was a giant cat. And he was pure black, so people would be like, oh my gosh, he's a panther, but a manx, if he said manxome, is he cat-like? Is he, in this poem, for instance, is he stealthy? Something that kind of ascribes itself to a big cat. And so he says, though, he was looking for the Jabberwocky. Long time the manxome foe he sought, so rested he by the tum-tum tree. Now that just sounds cute. We don't know what a tum-tum tree is, but we assume it's just an adorable little tree or something. And stood a while in thought. And as in uffish, that's a nonsense word, thought he stood the Jabberwock. So we're assuming this is the son. The kid gets his sword, goes out into the woods, looks for the Jabberwocky. And finally, he's tired or something, and he rests by the tum-tum tree and is like, where is my foe going to go? Where is he? How can I find the Jabberwocky? And what happens? The Jabberwocky finds him. The Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood and burbled as it came. And it's funny because the Muppets, I don't know, you guys, are you too young to have ever seen the Muppets?
I have seen the Muppets.
Okay, so the Muppet Show actually did this poem, and they even they created a Muppet that looked like the Jabberwock. And and then at one point he's like, and I think Kermit the Frog was playing the boy. So he had a little armor on and a sword. It was cute. But then he's like, when the Jabberwocky comes out, he's whiffling, whiffle, 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 whiffle. And so somebody's reading the poem, but then they're acting it out as it goes. Now, do we know what happens in the next here?
Attacking him, maybe?
Yes. Well, and he takes the sword. So remember that Vorpal sword, whatever that means. But he says, and through and through. So 1, 2, 1, 2, and through. The Vorpal blade went snicker snack. Of course, blades. And it's funny because Kermit the Frog actually did go snicker snack when he was, throwing his sword around. But then what happens to the Jabberwocky?
He was dead.
Yeah, he cut off the Jabberwocky's head. And he went galumphing, and he does actually galumph. Kermit the Frog, galumph, galumph, galumph. But he went galumphing back. Of course, it sounds like he's like almost riding a horse. Galumph, 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 So he left the body took the head and brought it back to dad. And we know it's dad because the next stuff is dialogue. And this is what the dad says to him. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. Oh, frabjous day, Callooh, Callay. He chortled in his joy. And so it's a happy day. Now the woods are going to be safer because the Jabberwocky's been slain. So we actually have a plot, despite the fact that half of these words don't make any sense. And we know what the plot is. It's actually not that hard to figure out. And then we go back into the creepy stuff, right? At the end. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toes. But the truth is there's actually a narrative in here. And we even have dialogue. There's all sorts of stuff going on. And yet it's a goofy poem. So it's not, is there a deep meaning in here? I love that you're thinking it through. No, there's not.
I didn't really think so.
But remember, it's not okay. And when I say what's the poem doing, let's go back to that idea. If we say a poem, what's it doing? It's displaying nonsense words in a way that honestly makes a story.
Sense.
Yeah. So, and it shows too how much we create as readers just listening to the thing, and how much we don't have to know the meanings of stuff. Like, you don't need to look up these words. They don't mean anything anyway. And yet you totally understand what the poem's about and what happened in it. So you don't need to look up all the words. Does that make sense to you? Essentially, I'm undoing what the chapter told you to do.
Yes, it makes sense to me.
So the only thing you have to remember is read it out loud. And then stuff will come. And honestly, if you don't get everything that's in a poem, that's okay. Because most of the time when I read a poem, especially for the 8th or 10th or 12th time, I get more out of it. It's kind of like, have you ever watched a movie? You really enjoy the movie. Like you think, oh, wow, that's really cool. Like E.T. or something. One of those seminal movies that everybody should watch. And then you watch it again and you go, oh my gosh, the soundtrack is so good. Or, yeah. Wow, I love that scene. And did you see what those facial expressions that he made? I think, and you get a new interpretation of some character or some choice that somebody makes.
Yes.
Because you didn't catch it the first time. Well, that's the way poetry works. That's the way everything works, honestly. And so don't expect that everything's going to come, flaring at you and that you're going to, just by looking up all the words, you're going to be able to get it. It's far better that you just enjoy the poem and then see where it leads you. Good poems are intuitive. They are going to give you the information after a few readings. And honestly, even if they don't, like there are songs that I love and I still don't quite know what they mean, but I really like them. Or what I thought they meant, and you probably have heard this. There's a song and it's the song "Take Me to Church."
Yes.
When you read the lyrics, it's kind of a steamy sort of thing, and there's some disturbing imagery in it. And yet, I've heard people who are like, "Oh, I just love that song, Take Me to Church," and they sing it like they'd sing it in church, and that's not the kind of song it is. And there are times too when you've sung something, you're singing along, and you realize you're singing the wrong words, and you didn't hear it right. And yet you still really enjoy the song. There are songs, honestly, I've loved, and then I realized, I listened to them and really realized what they're about, and I'm like, that's dark. And you go, no, that's not what because it seems like a happy song, and yet it has darkness in it, and you're thinking, wow, I missed that. So, the truth is that's the way poetry should be. It's okay. Your job is not to get through all of the mysteries of what a poem is and define it all, because that is boring and really hard, if not impossible. Instead, for the next 6 or 7 weeks, I just want you to enjoy the poems and see what you can make of them. And honestly, I learn from my students every semester. I teach this because you come up with ways of looking at poems that really make them even better for me. And so I'm not looking for you to explicate a poem and tell me what it means so that I can know you're smart. I really want you to tell me what you see in the poem and what you think it's doing, because that's going to give me a much better idea of what I need to cover in this kind of a session, but also it tells me a lot about you, because the truth is poetry is probably more reader response than anything. Tell me what poems you really like. And tell me why they speak to you. That's really what I'm going to be looking for more than anything. So I'm hoping to see, I have specific questions with each poem, you know, for the journals, but feel free to write other stuff in there that's not asked for, because I really want to see kind of where you're coming from and what you like and what you don't like. And I mean, just like with the stories, I've already found a few that, given the response from students, that I won't teach again. You know, I'll try to find other short stories to replace them. So if there are poems that either mystify students so badly that they get confused, or just really difficult, I won't, you know, I'll know to replace them with something else. I just want you to enjoy poems and see what you can figure out about them as we go through this, okay? Do you have any questions, Rachel?
I don't think I do.
Okay. If you ever do, you can always email me, but you can also ask anytime in in these Thursday sessions. And thank you for coming. Otherwise, I would have been talking to myself, and that's not fun. So anyway, have a good rest of your day and a good weekend, and
Thank
keep
you. You
reading.
too.
And I'd love to hear as you go through your journals. I'll be enjoy seeing what you come up with. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.